So the other part that we want to talk about in this lesson is talk about how biology is the study of life, right? Now this is something that we've all heard before. But what is it that makes something alive? Think about that for a moment. It's actually not quite as easy to answer as many people think. Now there may be lots of things that we could argue is a characteristic of something that is alive. So let's think about some of these. For example, organisms use energy. Right? Organisms must consume energy to maintain their bodies and perform all of the different functions that need to happen. I mean, can you think of anything that's alive that does not use some kind of energy? Right? I mean, even plants, absorb sunlight. Maybe another characteristic could be organisms are made up of cells, and those cells contain genetic information. And this is a really important idea in biology. This idea of cell theory replaced the idea of spontaneous generation, that life just could begin out of nowhere. But cells always come from other cells. So if you find something and it's made up of cells, that might be a great characteristic of life. And also, if you look inside of the cell and then find genetic information, DNA or even RNA, these might be good indications that that entity is alive. Number 3 might be that organisms respond to the environment, right? There's a stimulus that happens and there's a response to that. If you put your hand on a hot stove, you quickly recoil because your neurons fire and your brain says, "Whoa, that's hot. Move your hands," right? A fourth one might be that all organisms also have this ability to reproduce, to do replication or reproduction. And we can think about that both. Organisms have the ability to reproduce their DNA, to replicate their DNA, so that they have multiple copies of their DNA, so that when the cells do divide, each cell gets new copies, but also just the ability to reproduce, to make new individuals of that organism, of that particular species. And sometimes that's asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction. Maybe a fifth characteristic might be that organisms all have the ability to evolve. And because evolution, is the keystone theory in biology, organisms then, if you are alive, you evolve. That's one of the things that just happens. Even organisms that clone themselves are evolving. There are other mechanisms besides just natural selection, like mutations and genetic drift and other mechanisms that are causing organisms to evolve over time. So, you may be sitting there, was that all of them, or are there some others? Maybe you might have thought of, do organisms move? Do organisms have some way that movement has to be a characteristic? Well, not everything moves, but most things do. What about water? Organisms must use water. Well, that's true almost for every organism on the planet, although there are a few exceptions where instead of using water, they use some form of hydrogen sulfide or some other components, chemical components, and are not based just in water. So there are lots of different things that could characterize what is life. And we're now going to look at some images here. So I want to just kind of look at each of these images, and you can just kind of decide on your own, is it alive, based on those characteristics that we've given. So we've got things like a turtle, a fish, yogurt, the mold on the outside of the bread. So, well, you could think of the bread itself and then think of the mold. Eggs that you get out of your fridge, are they alive or not? A bone, but that's sitting on the ground, is that bone alive? An apple, or seeds, a plant, a piece of wood, a potato, yeast, pearls. Maybe, if we have a Kleenex or something and there's, you've blown your nose into the Kleenex and there's some virus inside of the mucus there, are viruses alive, or are the bacteria inside of that alive? Or maybe, a bird, or any other thing that you look at. How do we know if something's alive? So we will dedicate a little bit more time to this, though, later on in the course as well.